Good to see everybody. We have several visitors this morning. I guess is that because it was Valentine's Day or the snow prediction or whatever, but we're glad to have all of you here that are visiting. We have asked Adam Schmidt to lead us in prayer. Get our study underway. We're in 1 Samuel. We're in 1 Samuel, the 9th chapter. And this is the transition from the time of the judges to the period of the United Kingdom under the kingship of Saul. So that's where we're at, and we have some questions that we have passed out, and we'll get those to those of you that do not have that. So let's go ahead and begin then with a word of prayer, and we'll go from there. Adam, if you would lead us, please.
Heavenly Father, we're so blessed to be able to come here together this morning to study your word together. Heavenly Father, we're thankful this morning for Leon and for the other teachers as they have prepared their lessons to help guide our studies this morning. Lord, we pray that you be with them to help them teach us from your word so that we might be able to gain the most from your word that we can this morning, Heavenly Father. Lord, we're thankful for this building that you've provided for us. We're thankful that we have our fellow brothers and sisters to study with, to encourage one another. Heavenly Father, please be with us as we go throughout this study. Help us to gain those things from your word that would help us to be better Christians. Lord, we ask all these things in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Adam. I told Adrian I was glad to see her this morning. You know, she's been out sick, and she's here with us this morning. She still has some residual cough, but hopefully that will clear on out. And so good to see her and Ryan. Glad to see Don Sweatman and his crew with us this morning. It's been a long time since they have visited with us. Kelly was dismissed from the hospital on the 12th, and here she is with us this morning alongside Grace. So we're very glad that she is here. And Jean's family is here with us this morning. We're glad of that. Now I know Bill will be making the announcements coming up. Also very glad to have Ann with us this morning, by the way. I know Bill will be making announcements, but just go ahead and give you some good news. You know, when we have good news, I like to share it with you. And Laura has had her baby just a short time ago, and I've been having texts this morning of, you know, it's hard labor, been in labor 24 hours, please pray, and, you know, even other info, and then we're going into delivery, and then just a while ago, the baby girl is here. So everything seems to be fine. We rejoice with them. Also, Irma Walmsley called last evening, and her daughter, the one that lives up north, has had a lot of health problems. She's had a fracture of the spine and has been moved to a Pittsburgh hospital, and it's in very serious condition. So Irma, she asked me to call her Irma, by the way, was to leave early this morning with other family members to drive up there, and she asked that we pray for her safety and for her daughter. So as I say, I've got a note, Bill, for you on that, but just go ahead and mention that at this time. Well, last study, Brother Hank directed us going through the text of 1 Samuel chapter 8. And in 1 Samuel chapter 8, this is where the people came to Samuel with a request for a king. They had a king at this time that they were not thinking too much about. When they asked for a king, who was really their king at this time? The Lord their God was king. But they said, give us a king that we may, how does that go now? Be like the nations round about us. God could govern his people with a king or without a king if they would be obedient to him. Just like today, one can be a Christian and live in different countries. The kingdom of God is international. There's not just one form of government the Bible specifies. But the thing that's especially wrong, we want to see beyond the idea of just the part about a king. The thing that's really a heart issue is when they're wanting to be like the nations round about them. You know, there's a text over in Leviticus chapter 18. Would you turn back there with me, please? Leviticus chapter 18. There's a text there that is anticipatory of their crossing the Jordan and getting into the promised land of Canaan. This, of course, is when they're still, at this point, at Mount Sinai. And Moses, though, is preparing them for all of this. Are you at Leviticus 18 yet? In verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, verse 2, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. And verse 3, here's what he says. According to the doings of the land of Egypt, where you dwelt, you shall not do. And according to the doings of the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you, you shall not do. Nor shall you walk in their ordinances. Verse 4, you shall observe my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk in them, for I am the Lord your God. I've always found this an interesting passage. God is saying, you've been in Egypt. Don't do like the people where you came from. Don't do like they did. I'm taking you to the land of Canaan. Don't do like the people of Canaan do. Well, what are you to do? You shall observe my judgments, keep my ordinances, and walk in them. I am the Lord your God. So, and really the next two chapters, and this one through chapter 20, is especially talking about things that they would do in Canaan that Israel was not to do, especially 18 and chapter 20. But the perpetual problem then and now for God's people is to be like the nations round about us. Remember what Romans chapter 12 verse 2 says? Be not conformed to the world, but be what? Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, proving that which is good and acceptable, the good and holy and acceptable will of God. So that danger of confirmation is always there. People talk about peer pressure as if that's something just young people have in school. And of course, it's very strong when you're a young person in school. I mean, if you think about it, about the worst thing that can happen to you in school is not to break your neck. You know, the worst thing that can happen in school is for you to be embarrassed in front of your peers. Isn't that right? Isn't that the worst thing in the world that could possibly happen? You know, be embarrassed in front of your peers. So peer pressure is strong. And when you get older, there's still peer pressure there. It's always there. And the pressure of the world in which we live. So that's the thing I want to take away from chapter 8, that for God's people to want to be like the nations round about them, there's all kinds of flags that ought to go up at that point, because that's going to lead just to all kinds of heartaches. So you have the little, you know how to change that as needed. So basically, Samuel talked to the people. When he talked to them about it's not going to be all roses, and talked about as Hank pointed out, they're already paying a tithe to the Lord. But in addition to that, they would pay a tithe to the king. And he would take the best of their lands, of their sons, their daughters, and so forth. But when he got through with saying, you know, there's this other side too you need to consider, what do the people say? Anybody? Yeah, verse 19. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, but we will have a king over us, that we may be like all the nations, that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. I will say one thing that is a present threat that we don't learn about right yet there, but we do learn about later. Fast forward with me to chapter 12, where Samuel looks back on this occasion and tells one thing that motivated them as far as the timing when they asked what they did, when they did. 1 Samuel 12 and verse 12. Wes, you want to read that for me? Okay. Now we're going to learn the Philistines that had, been subdued. Time is passing on, so we're going to learn the Philistines are becoming more and more of a threat. We'll learn that because God is going to tell Samuel, Saul will deliver Israel from the Philistines. But the other thing we don't learn yet, but we learn later when Samuel looks back, is the time when they asked for a king, Nahash the Ammonite. Now the Ammonites lived east of Israel. Remember that? Ammonites on the east side of Israel and to the south. But now they're making inroads. They're coming against Israel. So he said, you saw that was playing out. And that's when you asked for a king to be like the nations round about us, round about you, when the Lord your God was king. So we're going to look at that threat from the Ammonites when we get to 1 Samuel chapter 11 and the events there at Jabesh Gilead. So what happened is, at the end of chapter 8, the Lord said to Samuel, verse 23, heed their voice and make them a king. And Samuel said to the men of Israel, every man go to his city. The way they get a king is not by popular vote. In fact, Samuel just says, okay, I've heard you. Go home. And what's going to happen is God is going to reveal to Samuel the man that God chose to be their king. And so the people made the request, but they didn't choose the king. God chose the king, and of course we know he's going to be Saul. And even though you can't think about Saul without thinking about the sad things, his disobedience. And it's not just the fact that he disobeyed. David disobeyed. But what did David do that's different from Saul? Yeah, David repented. He turned the thing around. He didn't keep on in his sin. But with Saul, once he starts that departure from God, there's never a return. He just keeps going further and further away. By the time you get to the end of this book, he's consulting a sorceress. And so there's only a downward spiral away from God. And so and Samuel nailed it in 1 Samuel 15 when he talked to Saul about stubbornness and rebellion. And when you have those qualities and don't repent of it, it just keeps taking you further away from God. Okay, so here we are in chapter 9. And now is when we're introduced to Saul. Now, it's kind of like other Bible subjects, any number of Bible subjects. You sometimes have more than one passage that will give information about that. Often you do. And in this particular slide here that I put together, this is making use of this passage plus other passages that gives you the genealogy of Saul. And it's been a while since you've had this kind of information where you stop to have a list of names from someone's genealogy. But what it does in chapter 9 and verse 1, it just says there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish. Now Kish is going to be the father, of course, of Saul. But what he does is to trace it from Kish to Abiel, to Zeror, to Bechorat, to Aphiah, a Benjamite, a man of great power. And so it's kind of doing the genealogy in reverse. It's starting with where you are and going all the way back to Benjamin. And so if we were to start with Benjamin, see Benjamin, of course, the Benjamin here, and the one, of course, as he's tracing the genealogy back, that is Jacob's son Benjamin. But because now we're getting to a really, really important character. This is a major transition now that we are entering into the kingship, and here is King Saul. He's going to be a major character throughout the rest of this book of 31 chapters. So instead of just saying Saul and then going on, it's telling you where he came from. And his roots go back to Benjamin himself. So when you combine starting with Genesis 46 verse 2 and up to where we are, including the references in Chronicles, you've got Benjamin and others, Becher, Aphiah, and Bechorat, Zeror or Zur, Abiel, Yehiel, Ner, Kish, and Saul. And even then, when you do some comparisons, sometimes it may go from a grandfather to a grandson and leave out the father, and still the genealogy is intact. Aaron?
You check on the Genesis 46:2 reference.
Yeah, that is not right, is it? That is incorrect. So, yeah, don't include that one. Of course, thank you, Aaron, for that. I sure don't want to have a wrong passage there. And right now I'm not remembering what that was, except, of course, obviously Benjamin is mentioned in Genesis in the blessings that take place in Genesis 49. But I'm not sure right now. Genesis 49 verse 27 is one such passage. But yeah, thank you for that. We'll just have to scratch that one. But anyway, here are the names. The names are accurate. So that's the point. That's the point really of chapter 9 and verse 1 as far as the getting us to where we are with Saul. So he has a son whose name is Saul. How is he described in verse 2? Yeah. Would you say he's good looking? Would that be an understatement? There's not a more handsome person than he among the children of Israel. He had every appearance of leadership. What's the problem we're introduced to in verse 3? I mean, why would the Bible tell us about somebody's donkeys being lost? I mean, isn't that rather mundane? The lowly donkey. And so here we are, God is taking time in His Word to tell us about a man whose 3 donkeys were lost. How's that going to have anything to do with this? Okay. God is able to use the mundane to accomplish His purpose. And when Saul went looking for those donkeys, he didn't have any idea, what was up. He didn't have any idea that he was going to be selected as king. Nobody else in Israel did. Nobody did. And so he and his servant go out looking for the donkeys that were lost. That's going to end up taking them to Samuel. Although they never do find the donkeys. Somebody, the donkeys are found, but that becomes immaterial. This just gets us going. But I'll tell you though, when you look at this donkey, the one reason I'm showing you this donkey, besides it's in Israel, is that this is in the vicinity of where we're talking about. This is a short distance from before you get to Gibeah, which is Saul's home. So this is the terrain of some of the geography that is under consideration. Also, when I took this photo, you notice in the background up on the hill there is a Bedouin's tent. And so there are a lot of things that change. I mean, you can go to Tel Aviv and you can see sky-rise buildings that sure weren't there in Bible times. But when you look at a setting like this, it's just like it was in the days of Saul. There were people, not everybody lived in tents, people had houses. A lot of people lived in tents and moved their tents around like Bedouins do, and they would have had donkeys just like this one. And so here they are, they're looking for the donkeys. And so it tells us about the various places that they travel through. Notice in verse 4, he's passing through the mountains of Ephraim. Now, here is Saul's home, Gibeah. Here is Gibeon. You remember where the Gibeonites are from. And actually I was, let me show you, I was just about right along in here when I took that photo I just showed you. But anyway, he's passing through, when you go north of Benjamin, of course that's the tribe of Ephraim. And all this is mountainous country. So he's passing through the mountains of Ephraim, verse 4, and through the land of Shalisha, right there. That seems to be the upper extent. And then he sort of makes a turn. He still hasn't found those donkeys yet. And then they pass through the land of Sha'alim, the text says, in verse 4. Passed through the land of Sha'alim. They were not there. So they passed through the land of Benjamin, but did not find them. So he's left Benjamin. He's gone as far as Shalisha, and on his way back through Sha'alim. And then by this time, he's entering into Benjamite territory. So they still haven't found the donkey. But apparently what he's done from his home in Gibeah, that's Saul's home, from his home, he's just made kind of a big circle. Probably, if I were looking for something, I'd be zigzagging back and forth. But anyway, they don't find him anywhere. But that's a lot of ground to cover for 3 donkeys. I mean, it just, I'm impressed with that. So finally, Saul is saying in verse 5, when they come to the land of Zuph, he's telling his servant, let's just go back home. By now, my father's going to be not worried about the donkeys. He's going to be worried about me, us. So let's just go back home. And the servant said, well, wait a minute, I've got an idea. What does the servant suggest? Pardon me? Okay. There's a seer in this city. And everything he says comes to pass. Let's go ask him. Well, I'm summarizing, putting that in my own words in verse 6. And he doesn't say Samuel. He just says there's a man of God. What does that expression, man of God, mean? Were not all of the Israelite men to be men of God? What does man of God mean? That means a prophet. That's the way that word is used. Well, what is Saul's first response in verse 7? Yeah, we don't have anything. What kind of present do we have? Saul says the bread in our vessels is all gone. See, they've been traveling. They've been doing a lot of walking. They had a sack packed when they left with food in it, and it's all gone now. What are we going to do? Well, and it doesn't really go on to say that they gave Samuel anything or he took anything, but it's just like today. Bill Hall has told about how many times in the summer here in Coleman County go and hold meetings, and somebody will say, I put some cantaloupe out in your car. I mean, where does that come from? What's this idea of giving cantaloupes and vegetables to a man that's a gospel preacher? Can he not buy his own food? I mean, what is that? I mean, why do people do stuff like that? By the way, I like cantaloupes, in case you're wondering, and watermelons. Why do people do stuff like that? Do what, Raymond?
Examples like this. If the person who's preaching is considered a man of God today, people want to reward them for that.
Okay. I mean, is that a bribe? You get a cantaloupe, so that's a bribe. Okay. Expression of love, esteem. Does Galatians tell us, let him that is taught communicate with him that teacheth and all good things? So is it kind of a token of appreciation? But when somebody does something like that today, I'm just saying it has a long-standing tradition. This is way back this is more than 1,000 years before Christ. But the idea is, we need to give him some token of our expression. And the servant said, I've got a piece of silver. Now, do you notice that it's not a coin? The reason it's not a coin is because coinage had not been invented yet. Nobody had coins back then. And so it was all in weights, like shekels, talents, stuff like that. It was all in weights. So he's got a piece of silver. He's got a piece of money. And so he says, I've got that. So Samuel says, okay, let's go. So as I say, that they have this conversation, but I mean, it turns out it's not like when you get there and you get to meet them that it even tells about them offering or Samuel receiving anything. So the parenthetical statement in verse 8 is, when a man went to inquire of God, he said, come, let us go to the seer, for he who is called a prophet was formerly called a seer. Those are interesting words. The word for prophet, nevi, means to bubble forth, to spring forth. And it's the idea that God has given the revelation to the man of God and he springs forth with it. It comes from his mouth, but it's God speaking through him. He is the Nevi. But then here's the word roeh, which comes from the word that means to see, roeh. And so how does God oftentimes reveal his will? it would be in visions. It would be things that the prophet would see. God would show him these things. And then he would communicate what he had seen. So he is the seer, you see. So those words have a practical meaning in terms of the origin there of what that comes from. So that's just a parenthetical thought. It's like somebody here that's reading this and doesn't know what seer means. That's what we call a prophet. So he used to be called a seer. So, by the way, this is just to see how much you remember about what you have studied. Where is the first mention of the word prophet in the Bible? Anybody remember? I wouldn't consider you a bad Bible student if you didn't know that. But on the other hand, it's interesting to know it. Anybody? Anybody? It's in the book of Genesis. It's in Genesis chapter 20. And that's where God told Abimelech of the Philistines that Abraham would pray for you. God says he's a prophet and he will pray for you. So the first time the word is used, it's used in regard to Abraham in Genesis chapter 20. Abraham is referred to as a prophet. Okay, so with that in mind, Samuel says, okay, let's go. And they went to the city where the man of God was. Now, let me see. The city where the man of God was, you remember we've talked about Ramah, we've talked about Mizpah, we've talked about Gilgal, places where Samuel made his circuit, as well as Bethel is included in verse 16. Is Bethel on this map? Yeah, it's right up here. Okay? So Bethel, Mizpah, Ramah, and Gilgal are mentioned in chapter 7 and verse 16. And then verse 17 says he always returned to Ramah, for his home was there. When it says he went from year to year on a circuit, that's usually taken to mean, when it says year to year, that in the course of 1 year he's making a circle. In other words, by the time he's at Ramah a while. But as he goes to Gilgal and Bethel and Mizpah and then back to Ramah, that's a yearly circuit. So he's working out from those areas. Does that make sense? So the thing is, I've said all that to say, when you get right here and it says in verse 10, well said, let us go up. So they went to the city where the man of God was. Well, here's the thing. What city was that? Well, the way they've been going after the donkeys, you can see that Macmillan Bible Atlas is putting it here at Ramah. And many will believe that it is here at Ramah, because, how would this servant figure that more than likely Samuel is in this city? Well, remember his home was in Ramah. But it doesn't say which city, and of course if it doesn't say, that means we don't have to know. It's just they went to the city where the man of God was, very possibly would be Ramah. It could have been one of these other cities where he spent time on his circuit, and it could have been yet another city. He could go anywhere he wanted to in Israel. He's the prophet, he's the judge. And it's not like he'd be out of his jurisdiction, if he left one of these places. He could go anywhere. But the very wording is, this servant is anticipating that Samuel will be there. The prophet will be in this city. So it may well be Ramah. So as they're going up, some women are going down, verse 11. And what are the women going down for? Are they going down to draw water? That's life as it should be. That's obviously women's work. Just kidding. Sort of. But I don't know that that's life as it should be, but that's life as it was. And by the way, when Jesus was telling his disciples, and he didn't want Judas to know where they were going to meet, where they were to prepare for the upper room, do you remember that little tidbit where Jesus says you will find a man carrying a jar of water? To say you will find a man carrying a jar of water in a city where there's hundreds of thousands of people there to attend Passover shows you that men didn't carry water. Women carried the water. If they would see a man carrying water, you go to him and you say, the teacher's ready. And he's going to make ready the room for you. So anyway, that's just a glimpse into life as it was. They were going down to draw water. You know, when Jacob first met Rachel, she was there as a shepherdess to water the sheep. When the servant of Abraham first met Rebekah, she was there to get water. So that's just a part of the biblical scene, which I was, just kidding about what I said a while ago, but not kidding about the fact that's the way it was. So they asked these women, is the seer here? They said, yes, you can go see him. Hurry up. In fact, it says, for today he came to this city. So how about the timing on that? What if in their search for the donkeys, they'd been there the day before? Well, they'd have missed Samuel. But these women are saying, today he's just arrived. So you see, all of this shows how God is orchestrating it for Saul to get to be with Samuel. And so that's the power of God. He is able in his providence to orchestrate events for the outcome of his will to be done. So they're making their way. They're going up to the city. They hear that he's going to bless a sacrifice. People are going to be eating. They've been invited. So they arrive in verse 14. They're going up to the city. And as they're coming up to the city, there was Samuel coming out toward them on his way to the high place. And so there he is in verse 14. He is. They meet him right at that point. As they're going, he's coming, and he meets them right there. The high place under consideration is where the sacrifice would take place, and that's not in the city. See, he's going out of the city to the high place. And verse 15, the New King James really is getting close to the original text when it says, now the Lord had told Samuel in his ear the day before Saul came, saying. Now, do you have Hank, what does the New American Standard say on that? Does it say disclosed or revealed or something like that? Okay, revealed. Now, that's what it means. That's what it means. But literally what it is saying, and the reason that the New King James and maybe some other translations will mention that part about his ear. Raymond, do you have the King James Version? Okay, so it says the Lord had told Samuel in his ear. And as I say, literally it's like something's covered. It's as if something's covering the ear, but you lift up the covering to speak into someone's ear. I mean, if you want to get the picture of what the text is saying. Now, to say revealed is the point, but it's literally as if an ear's been uncovered and somebody is telling you something right in your ear. I just thought that was an interesting picture to show how God had revealed this. It's not Samuel felt some kind of inner nudging. It's not like he had some kind of inner feeling. God spoke this in his ear, literally in his ear. He heard it. What did God say? Well, tomorrow about this time, I'm going to send you a man from the land of Benjamin. You shall anoint him commander of my people, that he may save my people from the hand of the Philistines. Now, earlier after chapter 7, it's saying, the Philistines were not the threat that they were previously. And as in the, verse 13 of chapter 7 says the Philistines were subdued and so forth. But what happens is that in the process of time, they start inching back. They start building back up. And so that helps us make sense of what God has in mind. He will save my people from the hand of the Philistines. I've looked down upon my people. I hear their cry. So at this very time that we're talking about, when Saul arrived, when Samuel saw Saul, that's not the easiest thing to say. Samuel saw Saul. The Lord said to him, there he is, the man of whom I spoke to you. This is the one. This one shall reign over my people. And so Saul still doesn't know Samuel yet. He says, please tell me, where is the seer's house? And Samuel answered and said, I am the seer. Go up before me to the high place where you shall eat with me today. Tomorrow I will tell you I will let you go and tell you all that's on your mind. And he says, by the way, about those donkeys, we started about those donkeys in this chapter. Verse 20 says, as for your donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, see, it's been 3 days. This is the third day now. They've been searching now. All the food's gone. They're tired. They've been walking and looking, couldn't find them. He says, don't worry about that. Don't be anxious. They've been found. Then he says this that perplexed Saul. He said, on whom is all the desire of Israel? Is it not on you and your father's house? Well, Saul couldn't make anything out of that. He says, am I not a Benjamite, of the smallest of the tribes of Israel? My family the least of all the families of the tribe of Israel. Why do you speak to me? Why do you speak like this to me? Now, besides the fact that Benjamin would have been one of the smaller tribes anyway, why would it make sense to you at this point? Hank, why would it make sense to you at this point for Saul to talk about how small the tribe of Benjamin was? Yeah, but what happened to the tribe of Benjamin in the book of Judges? I mean, all except how many men? Remember? 600. So they would have been small anyway. But we've just learned that in this same framework we're talking about in the period of the Judges, because of their stubbornness and they wouldn't punish the evildoers at Gibeah, and all Israel gathered together as one man and fought against them, the tribe was about exterminated. In fact, the last part of the book of Judges is telling us how the other tribes kept Benjamin from becoming extinct by getting wives for those remaining 600 survivors. And I know some time is, you can say, well, yeah, a little time has passed, but it's still in the time of the Judges. So when he says they're a small tribe, they were really a small tribe. They were really an insignificant tribe because they were building up from nearly being extinguished, you see. So Samuel brought Saul, and there are honored guests. In fact, there are 30 special honored guests in this hall, this banquet hall in verse 22. And there he is seated and honored. And Samuel tells the cook to bring the portion that I gave you, which I said to you, set it apart. And so this choice cut before everybody is given to Saul in verse 24. And Saul ate with Samuel that day. And verse 25, when they had come down from the high place into the city, Samuel spoke with Saul on the top of the house. Now, I don't know if most of you we've invited everybody to our house. There might be times you can't come, but a lot of you have been to our house. Can you imagine me being on the roof of my house? When the roofers were on the roof of my house, do you know that they were secured by a rope? Our house is steep. And you don't go on the roof. And if you do, you're trained in what you do and you have a security system. But see, this was flat. This is like a patio. This is like an extra room. See, kind of like when Peter, was on the rooftop in Acts 10 when he received the vision about Cornelius. This is an extra room. So I've seen biblical houses that have been reconstructed, and it is a very common thing. I've seen current houses that people live in that will have flat roofs in Bible lands. So anyway, that's what we're talking about. So he's speaking as a place they can have some privacy, and this is where Saul is apparently going to spend the night. They rose early. It was about the dawning of the day that Samuel called to Saul on the top of the house, get up that I may. So apparently a bed was set up there, and he spends the night. And early in the morning, Samuel calls him, get up that I may send you on your way. And he got up. Both of them went outside, he and Samuel. So now they're going to the outskirts of the city. And Samuel says, tell your servant, go on a little bit, and you stay here. I want to talk to you privately. And this is one of those places where a chapter division, it's not like it's a bad thing. It's just, you got to remember, that's put there by men. And what does it mean? It really doesn't mean anything. Because what we keep our minds on here is, it's really right in the middle of a thought. And so instead of stopping right now to answer questions, let's just continue. When Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on Saul's head and kissed him and said, is it not because the Lord has anointed you commander over his inheritance? Now already holy anointing oil has been provided for the high priest. The high priest is called the anointed priest. But now for the first time, a king has been anointed. The Hebrew word that is used here is the word Messiah. Messiah is the noun. It's the verbal form that is used when it says to anoint. But it's the word that is rendered in the Greek by the word Christos or Christ. And so Jesus is anointed to be our high priest, to be our king. And a third person that we occasionally see anointed is a prophet. And Jesus is all of those three, all in one. So that's done. And what Samuel does next is to offer, is to utter, I should say, a prophetic discourse of saying, as you leave here, three things are going to happen. And what this will do is it will confirm the action and the statements that Samuel has just made. He says, when you depart from me, you'll find 2 men by Rachel's tomb in the territory of Benjamin at Zelzah. And they'll say to you, your donkeys have been found. Your dad's worried about you, verse 2. So you keep going there, and you go to the oak of Tabor in verse 3, and you keep going. And you'll meet 3 men that are going to God at Bethel. They'll meet you, one carrying 3 young goats, and another will have 3 loaves of bread, and the third man will have a skin of wine. And they'll greet you and give you 2 loaves of bread. So would you say there is a great deal of specificity in the nature here of this prophecy? And then the third occasion is, when you come to the hill of God, where the Philistine garrison is, and this is referring to his home at Gibeah, by the way, then he says, some of the sons of the prophets, a group of prophets, you'll meet them, and they'll be having instruments, and they'll be prophesying. In verse 6, the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you, and you will prophesy with them and be turned to another man. So when these 3 signs come upon you, you do as the occasion demands, for God is with you. And he makes an appointment for future reference in verse 8 to Gilgal. And then in verse 9, so it was when he had turned his back to go from Samuel that God gave him another heart, and all those signs came to pass. And so it's really an abbreviated part. You know, it doesn't tell about his approaching, his being on the road to Rachel's tomb. It doesn't give any, it just says all that came to pass. And the one it does specify is that third one about the prophets. So the first 2, it just summarizes it by saying all these came to pass. By the way, when I was thinking in terms of talking about you will meet 3 men, and one of them is carrying, did you notice it says one is carrying 3 young goats? Can you imagine one man carrying 3 goats? Now, I don't have a photo of a man carrying 3 goats, but in Athens, Greece, I took a photo of this man who was carrying 1 calf, and this dates back to about 500 years BC. I found that interesting. And this past May, when I was in Sanli Urfa, which in Roman times was Edessa, this is in upper Mesopotamia. Got all that? I happened to bump into this gentleman. I don't know what he was going to do with this lamb. He was just walking around, and I thought, well, that'll be a good. And he saw one take his picture, and he just kind of stopped there for me. But it's this kind of situation where you've got one man and he's carrying 3 kids. Now, I don't know if that's the normal thing or not, but that was one of the signs. To me, it'd be a little unusual to be carrying 3 kids. And then the other one has the 3 loaves of bread, and he's going to give you 2. I wondered how practical that was, because their food's gone. I know they've eaten with Samuel, but I figure there's 2 of them, that's 1 apiece. I suppose they were to eat it, you know, give them 1 apiece. But anyway, that happens there. And as I say, he's to make his way on up to the hill of God. And I understand that to be Gibeah. And the context would show that to be true, because he is here at home and his uncle is asking, you know, what do the prophets say? And all that's taking place after he has arrived. So the hill of God is Gibeah. And this is Gibeah. And you can see why it would be called the hill of God, because it stands out as a prominent hill. So this is Saul's home. And by the way, talking about the Philistines, archaeological work has been done at the top of Gibeah, and they have unearthed Philistine garrisons, buildings, complexes, and so forth up here that date back to Philistine times. in perfect harmony with what the text says here about the presence of the Philistines. So, he prophesies. He never does this again. You see the musical instruments involved. So that happens. And as I say, then his uncle asked. This could be Ner, his uncle. Some have suggested Abner, who was also his uncle. But anyway, here it doesn't say, it just says his uncle said, "What did Samuel say?" Now the uncle has no idea, no clue about what it was. It's just anytime somebody had the occasion to talk to Samuel, the prophet, and they came back home, what would you ask that person? Wouldn't you say, well, what did the prophet say? Wouldn't that be of interest to you, what Samuel said when somebody has just come from seeing Samuel? Well, Saul doesn't tell it all. He said, oh, he told us the donkeys were found. He doesn't tell that part yet about the kingdom. And so that's what verse 16 points out. So what's going to happen is, in verse 17, all the people are called at Mizpah. And he's going to anoint Saul to be king, except, and they use an unnamed way of narrowing it down to the tribe and to the family and down to Saul. I would suggest to you it's probably Urim and Thummim, though that expression is not used, but that's what God gave for such occasions, right? So at any rate, God is revealing that, and they came down to Saul, and so they're looking for Saul. And where was Saul? Anybody know? Yeah, he had hidden himself among the baggage. Do you know any time people are traveling on foot and getting together, that they got to carry some stuff, for the trip? And so what they do when they got where they're going, there'd be a place, well, let's put all of our stuff here. It'll be safe here. Probably had somebody watching it. You remember how that Saul was watching the garments of those that stoned Stephen? So here's all the stuff, and somebody's watching it. And he had hidden in that. There was such modesty and bashfulness there. And so, in fact, verse 23, when somebody says, he's hidden among the equipment, look at what the people did in verse 23. Does it say they walked? It says, so they ran and brought him from there. And Samuel has him now before all the people. He's already anointed him privately in verse 1. But now publicly, he's explaining to the people the behavior of royalty, wrote it in a book, laid it up before the Lord, and that would be at the ark, which is at Kiryat Yearim. And Samuel sent all the people away, and Saul went home to Gibeah. So he's going from Mizpah to Gibeah. And people are happy. Verse 24, they're saying, long live the king, except verse 27 says, some rebels said, how can this man save us? So they despised him and brought him no presents. And the text says, but he held his peace. Does anybody happen to have the 1901 American Standard with you? Anybody? Nobody? Okay, he kept silence. The American Standard of 1901 will have a little footnote and tell you literally what the Hebrew text says. What it literally says is not always the easiest flow in our language, so that's why. But it says literally, it should be rendered, it was as though he was deaf. That's really what the text is saying. He heard it, but he acted like he didn't hear it. He heard what they said, but he didn't feel that he had to make any response. God had chosen him, and he didn't take issue with these people. He heard it, but it was as though he was deaf. Have you rung the bell yet, Joe? And as I say, what we'll do with our next time, we'll look at our questions on 9 and 10, and then we'll proceed with 11.
On the reference Aaron asked about Genesis 46:2 21, 46:21.
Okay. Okay, that's it. I didn't go down far enough. Thank you, Nathan. Okay. Aaron, did you hear that? And everybody? I'm sorry about that. I hate to have a wrong reference. But instead of 46:2, 46:21. 46:21. I will fix that.